I stood in my own kitchen smiling weakly as candles flickered atop my cake. My knees ached, my hands trembled, but my heart shattered the moment I heard her, the woman my son married, lean in and sneer. I hope this is her last one. She didn't know I was right behind her. For years, I gave them everything: childcare, half my pension, even my house title, telling myself love would win. But love doesn't live where respect is dead. That night, I didn't cry. I planned. I realized I'd raised a son who let his wife mock my existence. That was the day Margaret Ellis of Oregon stopped being invisible and started quietly pulling every string they never knew I had. I had just set the cake down when I heard it. The laughter in the living room was low casual, the sound of people enjoying cake and coffee and pretending to care. My back was turned. I was rinsing dishes in my own kitchen, still wearing the pink cardigan David gave me for my 70th. 5 years ago. I thought I heard wrong at first. But no. She's just waiting to die anyway, my daughter-in-law whispered. And then with a short, dry laugh, honestly, I hope this is her last one. My hands froze in the sink. The warm water turned cold. And for a long, still moment, I stared at the stream pouring down the drain like it was my life being washed away. I didn't say anything. I didn't gasp or drop the plate or confront her like a woman on television might. No. I simply stood there gripping a porcelain dish I bought back in 1985, the year my husband died, and I was left to raise David alone. I remember thinking, is this really how they see me? A burden, a ticking clock, a ghost at my own birthday. I gave up everything for that boy. I stitched and hemmed and waitressed through back pain and arthritis. I sold my jewelry for his college tuition. I took out a second mortgage to help with their down payment. When David married Alyssa, I smiled even though she never once called me mom. Even though she looked at my clothes, my hands, my house, and saw nothing worth respecting. I bit my tongue when she redecorated. I stayed silent when she accidentally threw out my late husband's fishing rod. I told myself this was love, this was family, this was sacrifice. But hearing those words on the one day, I thought maybe they'd remember I existed as more than a shadow in the hallway. I realized something. I had loved them more than I had ever loved myself, and they knew it, and they used it. I stared out the window at the wilting rose bushes I used to tend with pride. Now they were overgrown, unwatered, forgotten, just like me. And that was the moment it happened. Not rage, not bitterness. Something quieter, deeper. A shift, like a final breath before the storm. I dried my hands, walked into the living room, smiled at my grandson who barely looked up from his phone. Alyssa caught my eye, not knowing I'd heard every word. I offered her a slice of the cake I had baked from scratch. She declined. Too sweet, she said, like everything you make. And I just smiled, because she had no idea what I was about to do. She didn't know about the letter tucked deep in the back of my closet, my husband's letter, or the box hidden in the floorboards, or the favor I'd done for an old friend years ago that turned into something lucrative. No one did, because I was always just grandma, just a widow, just a woman who made tea and kept quiet, and they liked it that way. But things were about to change. Because on my 75th birthday, I heard the words that woke me up from a 30-year sleep, and Margaret Ellis of Oregon was done waiting to be remembered. Now it was their turn. I still remember the day I signed the house over. It was a Tuesday early spring. The cherry blossoms outside hadn't quite opened yet, but Alyssa had come into the kitchen waving the deed papers like they were birthday balloons. It'll just be temporary. She smiled, her voice sticky sweet. For tax purposes, we'll put it back in your name when things settle. David stood behind her, avoiding my eyes. I should have asked more questions. I should have read more carefully. But when your only son tells you it's to protect the family, you don't argue. You trust. You nod. You sign. And just like that, the house I built with Harold became theirs. The home where I raised David. The walls that held his height chart, his framed graduation photo, his laughter, all of it legally no longer mine. And with that signature, something in the air shifted. At first they were subtle about it. Alyssa started moving my things out of the front bathroom. Guests need space, she said. Then my rocking chair vanished from the porch. Then came the suggestion I eat meals in my room just while company's over. But company never left, and eventually neither did I, because I didn't feel welcome in my own home anymore. I became a ghost in the very place where I had once been, the heart. My old master bedroom was converted into an office and gym. I was moved to the smallest guest room right next to the laundry. They called it cozy. I called it exile. The kitchen, once mine, now belonged to Alyssa. She labeled shelves, bought gadgets I didn't know how to use, tossed my cast iron pan without asking. When I quietly protested, she laughed and said, "It's time you rested Margaret. You've done enough." Done enough, I had just given them everything. I remember one morning I came in early to make David's favorite banana muffins, something I hadn't done in a long time. I wanted to feel useful again. He walked in, sniffed the air, and grimaced. "Did Mom make these?" he asked Alyssa. "Yeah," she said. "I told her not to. They're too dense." They threw them away before even tasting them. Later that night, I stood in the hallway staring at the photo wall. Not a single picture of me. Not one. Just glossy prints of the grandkids, their wedding, their vacations. I had become the woman behind the camera, the forgotten cook, the invisible babysitter, the afterthought. That night, I found myself whispering to Harold's urn, "Did we raise a man who would let this happen?" And yet still I stayed. I made excuses. They're just stressed. It's a phase. I told myself that love was patience, that aging meant letting go that mothers give and never ask. But the truth, I stayed because I was scared. Scared of the world outside. Scared of being alone. Scared that maybe they were right. That I was just a burden, just an old woman waiting to die. But that birthday whisper, "I hope this is her last one," snapped the last thread. It wasn't just cruel, it was confirmation. I was no longer family, I was furniture. And suddenly I couldn't sleep in that guest room one more night. Couldn't eat another meal in silence. Couldn't watch my grandson imitate his mother's disdain. I realized something terrifying. They didn't just take my house, they erased me from it. But what they didn't know, what David forgot, is that his mother may be quiet, but she is not stupid. And when I gave up the house, I didn't give up my mind. So the next morning, while Alyssa was at her yoga class and David was on a call, I did something they never expected. I opened the closet in my tiny room and pulled down the shoebox marked Christmas lights. Inside, under old tissue paper, was the envelope I hadn't touched in years. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. It was from Harold. He'd written it before he died, just in case. Inside was a letter and a key. I hadn't even remembered what the key was for. But that was about to change. Because if they thought I had nothing left, no home, no money, no voice, then they were about to learn. Margaret Ellis might be old, but she is far from done. It was supposed to be just another Sunday dinner. Roast chicken, overcooked vegetables, and a room full of cold smiles, pretending to be a family. I had brewed a pot of chamomile tea the way I always did, gentle, warm, the kind that soothes the bones and softens the soul. I set it on the table with small porcelain cups that used to belong to my mother, the only family heirloom I had left. I poured it quietly the way I had done for years. For them. For everyone. But no one touched it. Alyssa rolled her eyes and reached for the sparkling water she brought. "Tea makes me bloat," she said. My grandson laughed and muttered something about old lady potions. David didn't look at me at all. And that's when I noticed it, the empty seat. The one at the table, the one where I used to sit. It had been filled with a vase of fake flowers, and no one had moved it. "Alyssa," I said gently, "where should I sit?" She blinked, then shrugged. Maybe just take the chair by the hallway. We needed space for the kids' projects." The hallway chair. The one with the bad leg and no cushion. I stood there for a moment too long, swallowing the lump in my throat. It wasn't about the chair. It was about the unspoken truth that had crept in. Like mold, I was no longer part of their table. No longer a voice in the conversation. No longer even a presence to be acknowledged. David was scrolling on his phone while Alyssa bragged about her latest Instagram partnership. My grandson talked about his gaming laptop. Not once did anyone ask how I was doing, if I needed anything, if I had slept well last night. Not once. And then, as if the universe wanted to see how far I would bend before I broke, Alyssa looked over her shoulder and said, "Mom, can you grab the pie from the oven?" Mom. She only called me that when she wanted something. And like a fool, I did it. Because I always did. As I walked to the kitchen, I caught my reflection in the glass door. A hunched woman in a sagging sweater holding a pie tin like a servant. That couldn't be me. That couldn't be Margaret Ellis, the woman who once managed payroll for a regional hospital, who once navigated single motherhood double shifts and funeral arrangements in the same week. That couldn't be the woman Harold once called the most resilient soul I've ever known. But it was. I placed the pie down and stood behind them as they talked over me about renovations, about expensive summer camps, about a vacation I hadn't been invited to. And I realized in that moment I had become a ghost. Alyssa turned to me and smiled that sharp little smile. "Oh, by the way, I ordered new cabinets. Hope you don't mind." "New cabinets," I echoed. "In the kitchen. Your stuff was cluttering everything. I boxed it all up. Should be in the garage or maybe the attic." She waved her hand like it didn't matter, like none of it ever had. I looked down at my hands raw from scrubbing their dishes. I thought about the aching in my knees from babysitting last week. I thought about how I used to wake early just to pack lunch for David when he was a boy. And now I was too dense, too outdated too in the way. That night after they all went to bed, I stepped outside into the chilly Oregon night. The moon hung low and full, and the roses I once trimmed with love were now buried beneath weeds. I didn't cry. Instead, I went to the garage. I found the box of clutter Alyssa had tossed away my hand-painted china, my recipe cards, a photo of Harold and me on our honeymoon, cracked at the corner, faded from sun and dust. I held that photo close to my chest and whispered, "They think I have nothing left." But I did. I had a memory, I had a name, and I had a key. The next morning, I dressed in my Sunday best. Not for them, but for me. A navy blouse Harold once loved, my mother's brooch. I looked in the mirror and saw traces of who I had once been and who I could be again. I called a cab, and while the house slept still snoring from wine and entitlement, I left. Not in anger, not in haste. I left with purpose. I took the key Harold had given me and headed straight to the bank. The safety deposit box hadn't been touched in over 25 years. The woman at the desk looked surprised as I handed her the slip. Inside, everything. The old Margaret, the smart one. The one who once made strategic decisions without anyone's help. The one who loved deeply but wasn't afraid to protect herself. And alongside the paperwork and deeds was Harold's letter. His final words. "In case they ever forget who you are, here's your reminder. Don't let anyone erase you, Maggie. Not even family." I read it twice. Then I smiled, because I knew exactly what I was going to do next. There are moments in life when everything suddenly becomes clear. Not in a burst of fireworks, but in the stillness after heartbreak, when the world stops spinning long enough for you to see exactly who you are. That moment came for me sitting inside a quiet bank office, Harold's letter trembling in my hands. I hadn't opened that safety deposit box since the year he passed. Back then, I was too overwhelmed. Grief was a thick fog. I told myself I'd come back to it later. But later turned into decades. And if I'm honest, I think I avoided it because I didn't want to be reminded of everything I had lost. But now I was ready. The box held more than memories. Inside were land deeds, stock certificates, and a notarized will. Harold had never needed to execute. My breath caught when I realized what I was looking at: assets, not just a few $1,000s tucked away for emergencies. No, this was wealth, quiet, hidden, safe. Harold had invested in timberland in eastern Oregon back in the 1980s, before anyone knew how valuable it would become. And he had kept it under my name. He must have known deep down that someday I might need a way out, a way forward. And now I had it. I left the bank different than I entered, taller somehow, straighter. Not just because I had a secret, but because I finally had something that was mine, undeniably mine. I went straight to the office of a lawyer Harold once trusted, Arthur Morrison. To my surprise, Arthur's son, Peter, now ran the practice. a warm, silver-haired man who looked more like a pastor than an attorney. "I remember your husband," he said after reading my file. "Smart man. Prepared for everything." I nodded. He was. Over the next hour, Peter helped me do 3 things. Set up a living trust, placing all assets from the safety deposit box under my legal control. Reclaim my house title, citing coercion and lack of informed consent, something he believed we could easily win with the right evidence. Establish a new identity for privacy, not fake, but discreet, under my maiden name, Margaret Callahan. "I want to live peacefully," I told him, "but I want them to feel what I felt. Not with hate, just truth." Peter nodded slowly. "You want to vanish and leave an echo." "Yes," I said, "exactly that." I spent the next few days making quiet arrangements. I didn't return to the house. I booked a suite at a discreet but luxurious senior living estate 2 towns over, tucked in a forested slope with mountain views and daily wine tastings. I paid 6 months in advance, in cash, under my maiden name. And then I made a few subtle moves my family wouldn't notice at first. I canceled the auto payments that covered the utilities on my house. I changed the password to the property tax portal. And finally, I withdrew my authorization from the joint bank account David had been dipping into for years. Let them wonder why the mortgage notifications were suddenly bouncing back. Let Alyssa sit on hold with customer service. Let them ask the questions they were too arrogant to prepare for. And I sat by the window in my new suite drinking jasmine tea from a porcelain cup they never saw, because they never cared to look. I spent the afternoons rediscovering my hobbies, writing embroidery, reading novels I'd always meant to finish. I walked barefoot in the gardens and spoke with women my age, who had also been dismissed, underestimated, and like me forgotten, until we became inconvenient. But I didn't need them to remember me anymore, because I was remembering myself. I never told Peter the full story, not the tea left cold, not the hallway chair, not the fake flowers that sat where my place at the table used to be. But he saw enough in my eyes to understand, and he treated me not as a client, but as a woman, reclaiming her dignity. A week passed before David called, then Alyssa, then David again. I didn't answer. The messages started kind. "Mom just checking in. Are you okay? Hey, Alyssa. Said she hasn't seen you. Are you on a walk?" Then they turned sharp. "Why are the bills bouncing? Did you cancel something? Where are you?" I listened to their voices while sipping tea under a skylight, the wind rustling the trees beyond my balcony. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I felt peace. And for the first time in years, I slept through the night. Because I wasn't just hiding. I was becoming whole again. And they were about to learn the price of forgetting who built the roof over their heads. They always assumed I was too old, too poor, and too simple to do anything for myself. And in some ways, I had let them believe that. It made them comfortable. It kept the peace. And for a long time, it was easier than confronting how little they actually respected me. But when I stepped out of the black town car onto the gravel path of Maple Ridge Estates, wearing my wide-brimmed hat and fresh linen slacks, the doorman greeted me with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Miss Callahan." Callahan, my maiden name, my name, not the one David's father gave me, not the one Alyssa scowled at. This was mine. The name I wore before I bent myself in half for a family that barely knew my worth. Maple Ridge wasn't a nursing home. It was a sanctuary. Tucked into the forest surrounded by rolling hills, it was where retired judges, widowed professors, and quiet millionaires came to live out their years in dignity. Suites with balconies, libraries with floor-to-ceiling windows, gourmet kitchens and on-call massages. Everything I had quietly denied myself for decades, telling myself I didn't need it. But now I did. Not for luxury, but for freedom. I checked in with one small suitcase and a fresh haircut. I didn't need to bring much. I had already arranged for deliveries of everything I'd need. The concierge handed me my welcome gift, fresh flowers, a spa card, and a note that read, "To Margaret Callahan, a new chapter begins." I stood in my suite and looked out over the pine trees. The sun filtered through like warm honey, and for a long time I just stood there breathing. Slowly. Fully. I felt my ribs expand in a way they hadn't in years. That night, I had dinner at the long table by the fireplace. Real silverware, real conversation. The woman next to me, Teresa, had once been a lawyer in San Francisco. We talked about books, music, and travel. No one asked me to cook. No one corrected the way I poured my tea. No one rolled their eyes at my cardigan. For the first time in years, I was just Margaret, and I was enough. Meanwhile, back at the house I had built, chaos was starting to bloom. David left 5 voicemails by day 3. The tone had shifted from mild concern to frantic confusion. "Mom, the gas got shut off. What's going on, Mom? Did you cancel the trash pickup? Alyssa's freaking out. Please call me." I didn't. Instead, I sent a single text. "I'm fine. I've taken some time for myself. M." I didn't owe them anything else. By day 5, the bank had contacted them. Their account had been flagged due to the sudden halt in joint activity. The card David had been using to fund their online purchases, my card was now declined. Alyssa called 3 times in a row, then sent a voice message laced with fake sugar. "Hi, Margaret. Just wondering where you are. The boys miss you. We thought you were going to help with the science fair project. Hope everything's okay." Science fair. The same project they had never invited me to be part of. The same children who mimicked her tone whenever I spoke. That night, I took a long bath with eucalyptus salts and listened to Ella Fitzgerald through speakers built into the ceiling. I felt the weight lift inch by inch from my shoulders. And as I dried off, I opened my small notebook, the one I had kept hidden in the lining of my old dresser for years. Inside were scribbled notes, memories, and passwords, but also plans. The title transfer of the house was already in progress. My lawyer, Peter, had found multiple procedural errors in how the deed had been signed, rushed without full legal advisement. Combine that with evidence of emotional coercion, and the case was airtight. Soon the property would be legally mine again. I hadn't told them. Not yet. Let them enjoy their confusion a little longer. Let them squirm, because for every night I sat alone in that hallway chair, for every plate of food I threw out untouched, for every whispered insult behind my back, this was the quiet reckoning they earned. They thought I'd never leave. They thought I couldn't. Because in their minds, I was just the old woman in the corner, with nothing left but memories and tea bags. But what they didn't know was this. I was planning a vacation long before I packed my suitcase. A vacation from their insults, from their entitlement, from the unspoken agreement that I should be grateful just to exist in their space. And while they scrambled to reset passwords, I lounged on a patio, wrapped in a fleece shawl, watching the birds come and go like visitors to a new life. They'd learn soon enough. The title notice would arrive in the mail within days, and with it, a truth they never bothered to ask. I wasn't just their grandmother. I was the architect of their comfort, and I had just knocked down the walls. It was a Thursday morning when the call finally came. Not to me, to them. I was sipping hot tea on the sun-drenched balcony of my suite, wrapped in my favorite blue shawl, the one Alyssa always said made me look like a grandma from a thrift store. Funny how things lose their sting when you're not living under the same roof as the people who hand you insults like compliments. I knew exactly what time the call would arrive. Peter had scheduled it for 10:15 a.m. sharp. David would have been just settling into his 3rd Zoom meeting, and Alyssa probably scrolling social media in bed, her morning green juice warming on the nightstand. I imagined her confusion first, her voice going tight, asking the banker to repeat what he said. Then the panic, then the scramble, then the text message that came through my phone a few minutes later. "Mom, did you do something to the house title?" The bank just called saying there's a legal dispute. What's going on? I didn't respond. Instead, I set my phone down and smiled, a slow, private smile that came from deep in my chest, the kind of smile you give yourself when you've waited far too long to stop being walked over. Because yes, I did something. I took it all back. Peter had moved fast filing the revocation and corrective deed forms. The original title transfer had enough holes to make a judge frown. My signature hadn't been properly notarized. I hadn't been given independent counsel. And more importantly, there was documented coercion. All those text messages Alyssa sent over the years telling me just sign it, it's easier this way, or you're lucky we're even helping with the bills. They were now exhibits in a file titled Ellis v. Ellis, Petition to Reclaim Property Rights. But the legal battle, it was barely a battle at all. They hadn't seen it coming, because they never thought I'd fight. For them, I was just the background music of their lives, soft, forgettable, always there. They didn't know I kept records. They didn't know I still had the letter Harold wrote me. And they certainly didn't know about the clause buried deep in the deed that Peter spotted instantly the right of reversion upon misuse of trust. In simpler terms, if I felt they had abused the privilege of ownership, I had the right to take it back. And I did. By 3 p.m., I got another message, this time from Alyssa. "You can't just do this, Margaret. This is our home. You gave it to us. Do you even know what this is doing to David, to the boys?" I stared at the message for a long time. I could have responded with 1,000 truths, that it was never our home, it was always mine. That what it did to the boys was a direct result of what they let them see and learn. That David never once stood up for me, not when I was humiliated, not when I was erased from their table, not even when Alyssa threw out my wedding china. But instead I typed 3 short words: "You erased me," and I left it at that. Later that evening, Peter called to inform me that the house title had been officially restored to my name. Not just restored, secured. I had added a clause to my will ensuring it would pass on to my grandchildren only if they completed college-maintained, respectful contact and never involved Alyssa in future inheritance matters. I wasn't being cruel. I was protecting what was mine and teaching them finally that kindness is not weakness. A few days later, the official eviction notice was posted. 30 days to vacate. No exceptions. Peter had offered to soften it, to draft it gently. But I told him no. Let it be firm. Let it be true. Let it be legal. Because I had asked for decency, begged for kindness, waited for love. And they gave me silence, indifference, contempt. Now I was giving them something else. Consequences. Of course, the phone calls started again. David's voice cracked on voicemail number 12. "Mom, please, can we just talk? I didn't know Alyssa said that stuff. I didn't mean for this to happen. I thought you were okay." And maybe once that would have worked. Maybe once I would have rushed back heart in hand saying, "I forgive you," but not now. Because now I understood that love without respect is not love at all. It's dependence. It's fear wearing a smile. And I was done with fear. Instead of returning to the house, I went to the spa. I had a massage. I got my nails painted in a color called Forget Me Not. And then I joined a watercolor class with 2 women who also used to live with sons who forgot how to say thank you. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. And for the first time in a long time, I remembered what it felt like to belong. Not because I was useful, not because I paid the bills, but simply because I was me, Margaret Callahan. Oregon native, wife, mother, widow, and now a woman they never saw coming. The day they showed up, the skies were gray and trembling. A storm had rolled in over the hills, gentle at first, like it was holding its breath. I was sitting in the Maple Ridge reading room tucked into a window seat with a copy of The Secret Garden. The same book I used to read to David when he was 7 and believed I could fix anything with a bedtime story and warm cocoa. The receptionist found me with careful eyes. "Mrs. Callahan, you have visitors." Visitors. I hadn't had that word said to me in months, not since I left, not since I vanished from their world like a dream they forgot they ever had. I walked down the hall slowly, spine-straight shoes, quiet on the polished floors. I didn't rush. I didn't rehearse. I found them in the front sitting area, David, on the edge of a suede chair, hands folded so tightly they looked like they might shatter. Alyssa stood near the door, eyes bloodshot, hair pulled back like she had stopped trying. For the first time in years, she looked tired. Real tired. Not the "I've had a long day with the kids" kind of tired. No, this was the kind of tired that comes when the foundations you thought were eternal begin to crack. The kind that says, "I thought I had control." And I was wrong. David stood as I entered. "Mom," he said, voice a whisper. I didn't answer. I sat. He took that as permission. We lost the house." I raised an eyebrow. "No, you lost a house you were never entitled to keep." Alyssa winced but said nothing. "I know David," said quickly. "I know we treated you horribly. I know I let it happen, and I can't believe I didn't see it. I was blind. I was afraid to stand up to her." He glanced at Alyssa. She didn't meet his eyes. I didn't speak. I let the silence stretch. Let them feel it. Mom, he continued, I'm not asking you to come back. His voice cracked. I just want a chance to make it right. Alyssa finally spoke. I'm sorry, Margaret. I said horrible things. I took advantage of you. I don't have any excuse. You were more of a mother than I ever deserved. That one sentence landed like a rock dropped in water. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't even particularly emotional, but it was honest. And maybe for the first time, it was real. I looked at both of them. These two people I had given everything to. My youth, my finances, my presence, my silence, my loyalty. They had squandered it, mocked it, erased it. But now, they were asking not for the house, not for money, but for forgiveness. And the strange thing was, I gave it. Because holding on to bitterness is its own prison. Because I didn't want to carry their failures on my back for one more mile. I took a long breath and said softly, I forgive you both. David let out something between a sob and a sigh. Alyssa's eyes welled with tears, but I held up my hand before they could speak again. But listen to me, I said gently. Forgiveness isn't a reset button. It doesn't bring things back to how they were. I won't be returning. I won't be staying in your lives the way you once expected. I'm building something new now, for me. Alyssa blinked. But the boys, they ask for you. They'll know where to find me if they grow into people who speak with kindness. David looked shattered but nodded. I left you the check, I added, for their college fund. That's all I'll give for now. The rest, that's for me to decide. They were quiet. I stood, and for the first time in years, I saw myself clearly not as someone waiting to be welcomed home, but as someone who had made her own home. Back in my suite, the storm outside finally broke. Rain pattered against the glass in soft waves. I curled under a blanket and lit a small candle, and I cried not from sadness, from release, because I had loved them, and I always would. But I was no longer bound to the version of myself that begged to be seen. I was Margaret Callahan again, reader, gardener, silent strategist, a woman who gave everything and finally gave something back to herself. They never thought I'd leave. They never imagined I'd thrive. And they certainly didn't expect that the best version of me would be the one that chose peace over permission. I forgave them, but I chose me. And from here on out, that's the only choice I'll ever need.